Thank you all so much for joining us. We are especially thrilled and grateful to have Soledad OBrien and Padma Lakshmi with us this evening to dissect the theme of power and how it impacts everything. Soledad OBrien is CEO of the Starfish Media Group, a multi-platform media production company dedicated to telling empowering and authentic stories that elevate today's most important social issues. She is also a correspondent on the Peabody Award-winning team of HBO's Real Sports with Ryan Gumbel. Additionally, she anchors and produces the Hearst Television political magazine program, Matter of Fact with Soledad OBrien, which is distributed by Sony Pictures. For her career, Soledad has been recognized with 3 Emmy Awards for her coverage of the Haiti earthquake, the 2012 election, and for a series called Kids and Race, and has been honored twice with George Foster Peabody Award. Earlier in her career, Soledad co-anchored on Weekend Today, where coincidentally I was her intern, and reported for Today and NBC Nightly News. In 2003, Soledad transitioned to CNN, where she was the face of the network's morning news shows for several years. Padma Lakshmi is internationally known as a food expert, model, entrepreneur, and author. Padma serves as host and executive producer of Bravo's Emmy award-winning show Top Chef. In 2009, Padma co-founded the Endometriosis Foundation of America. She also serves as an ambassador for the American Civil Liberties Union, focusing on both immigrants' rights and women's reproductive rights. Padma was recently appointed a United Nations Development Program Goodwill Ambassador with a focus on fighting inequality, discrimination, and empowering the disenfranchised. She was also named a visiting scholar at MIT. I think you'd all agree with me when I say these 2 women and their work embody the spirit of the Inspiration Room. Please join me in welcoming Soledad and Padma.
I don't know if you heard Dana. Dana was my intern when I worked at NBC. When a grown person says that they were that, I can't even tell you how that. Anyway, so welcome everybody. We're going to have a moderated conversation for a little bit, and then we're going to open this conversation up to questions. I really like the idea of talking about power with a woman who is very powerful. Truly, and I'll tell everybody a story. When we were trying to get on the phone, get our schedules together to chat before this event, one of your representatives got on the phone and he said, listen, Padma's picking her daughter up from school. And I love that because no one says that, right?
So she can't be on the call, but
she can't be on the call
for her.
Listen, but you know what? When I started working in TV, you would never tell anybody that you were picking up your kid. You would lie. Are in a meeting. You've got a call that's running. You would come up with 100 different reasons why you couldn't be on a call, but you would never say the thing that makes a lot of sense and was obviously true. You've got a child and you're picking her up from school, and that's why you can't be on the call. And I'm wondering how you define power and how you think about power.
I mean, that's certainly a sign of someone who feels like she can say that, or has the right to pick up her daughter in the middle of the day. I mean, that also has to do with the fact that I, run my own business, and so in one way, I'm very in charge of my schedule, and in another way, I'm not in charge of it at all because of how unpredictable it is. So on the days that I can go pick up my daughter, I'm going to grab that opportunity. And, I felt confident that whoever was taking the call was fine to do it. I think for me, power is more when you can give, to me, I feel powerful when I can give my power away to somebody else. And, for so much of my life, especially in my career, I felt very powerless. And I think a lot of women feel that way. And I've kind of tried to make it my mission to make sure if I can help a woman in her 20s, or a man too, but it just worked out as it's mostly women. I do. That to me is powerful to be able to, because I didn't have anyone to mentor me, and I didn't know what I was doing, and so I always felt like if I had some guidance, or if I had somebody older who had been around the block and had seen some of the problems that I was facing for the first time, I would have had an easier way of it. I would have managed to perhaps get further along a little bit more quickly, and so I feel powerful when I can lend my power to young women who feel that way today, because I know what that feels like. I know very deeply, what that feels like as a model, as an actor, as, somebody who has to wait for the phone to ring and be cast in something, or, get a show or whatever that is. And I think writing was very good for me because it was the only thing that I had power over. It was something that I could do without anyone having to tell me I could do it. And I was lucky I had people who wanted to buy and publish my writing. So
I think a lot of times we think of very beautiful women as being very powerful. And it sounds like you're almost saying the opposite.
No, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that beauty is not an asset, because like wealth or privilege, it is its own privilege. But it's also something that, comes with all this other baggage. So like anything, just, like any asset, it requires, understanding all sides of it. And I think sometimes when you're in a business that is so focused, as I was first, on your appearance, it's hard not to take your career personally. And it can be a curse, as well, because when you are paid for what you look like and just to stand there, it's hard not to really feel an exorbitant amount of pressure that I think wasn't really very healthy for me in my 20s,
You've talked a lot about rape and sexual assault. And I'm curious why, because I think a lot of women...
Take off my jacket. Talk about rape.
I think a lot of times people will say, that was in the past, and we just don't need to talk about it. Let's just move on. And you very intentionally decided, no, we're going to make everybody stop and listen to this story, that it was critical to you. Why?
Well, in my case, I never did talk about it. I hadn't talked about it at all. And the reason that I decided to talk about it was a very concrete one. It was during the Kavanaugh hearings, and I was very frustrated, like most of us. I was in college when the Anita Hill trial hearings were going on, and I couldn't believe that decades later, when the world is so, supposedly different, that we were still watching the same darn thing. We were just watching it with two different people. And it just angered me when I saw a tweet by Trump that said, if it was so bad, why didn't she report? Why didn't her loving parents report? Well, my mother was loving too. That has nothing to do with it. And we don't report because there's no upside to reporting. It's just completely re-triggering, and you get put through a microscope, and we've all seen that. Like, there's nothing that protects the victim. There's nothing that motivates her to call this person out. And of course we should. And so, I just wanted to say, hey, I am a woman, a fully functioning, college-educated woman who's working and in the world, and I didn't report. And it's not because it wasn't that bad. It's because it was really, really bad. And I didn't want it to ruin any more of my life or affect even any of my life as possible. I just brushed it away and put it away somewhere dark and deep, for so long. And so in my case, I wasn't talking about it until September. I did write about sexual molestation in one page of, a 300-page memoir, but it was very matter-of-fact and moving on, because it's hard to talk about these things, and that is what predators count on. Whether it's just sexual assault, not just, but whether it's sexual assault, whether it's sexual harassment in the office, or something much more violent.
It feels like we don't necessarily have a vocabulary for these conversations when we talk about even sexual harassment in the workplace. It's hard to have a conversation that sets rules. I was having a conversation with a bunch of journalists, right? And someone's like, so you can kiss people that you should not, no one should kiss people anymore. Or do you hug people in the office? Or no one should date in the, it just seemed like people
where is the line?
Right, where's the line? Just show me the line and we can have the line. And and nobody seemed to have the vocabulary for this, what I think is a complicated conversation. Do you think Time's Up and all these movements are helping articulate that vocabulary better? Have we moved some distance in finding a better way?
I think we've moved some distance. I'm involved with Time's Up, and I think it is, a huge boon to working women everywhere. I think we're all learning still, in the workplace as far as standards and practices of how to behave. I also think there's something much more insidious built in to our socialization as people. We have to take it a little bit further back, unfortunately. We tell our little boys different things than we tell our little girls, often in the same house, without meaning to. And because we've been conditioned to believe these things, and we've been conditioned, and our grandparents have been conditioned, and for millennia, this has trickled down to us, into our DNA, into our consciousness. And so we send these little boys who grow up out telling them one thing. We send these little girls out telling them another thing, and they're expected to engage together in the world. They're expected to not only be romantically involved, they're expected to compete for the same jobs. They're expected to, know what the other person wants in a court of law. All of these things. Even the law has for a long time been unequal, And so, yes, we need we need rules, we need, some clear-cut definitions. But I think, part of the problem is that a lot of men are conditioned by society to feel that when they smack a woman on the bum as she walks by, or literally pinch a girl's bum in the elevator, or catcall when they're walking down the street, that they're actually giving a compliment. I'm serious. There have been studies done where this is actually true. And the guy who does it will then get interviewed, and he'll say, oh no, I was just trying to make her night. I was trying to make her feel complimented. And so I think the way that you tackle it is that you really, in society, except for modeling, I guess, you really have to understand that a woman's main purpose is not to attract men. And I think that's a big thing, not in the office, not in the supermarket, not anywhere unless she really decides that is the case. And there's also an interpretation problem, because there have been times when I've just, walked by someone and smiled. I'm sure it's happened to every woman in this room. And then all of a sudden that person thinks oh, she smiled at me. So, and they're doing it innocently most of the time. And most guys are good guys, but then there are the schmucks that ruin it for everybody else.
Yeah. It's an interesting navigation, I feel, and I just don't know. I don't know that we've figured out how to have that conversation yet. What kinds of your daughter is 9,
She's 9.
It's my favorite age. 9-year-old girls are just.
She's a lot of fun.
They're very special. What kinds of conversations do you have with her about power, or is that too intense of a conversation to have with the 9-year-old?
Well, power is a very vague thing, because of what happened to me, and because she's, very precocious child, and that she's tall for her age and she's mature for her age, I was worried that she would be preyed upon, and I didn't want what happened to me to happen to her. So very early, even in preschool, I always had a very simple age-appropriate conversation with her where I say, you have power over your own body. You get to say who touches you or not, when you want or when you don't, not with their hands, not with their mouths. Nobody has the right to touch your body. And if they do, you say no really loud, and then you go, and then you tell someone. And I don't care if that person is a family friend, related to us, the principal of the school, the nurse. You have dominion. It's your body. Don't let anyone touch it. And don't let anyone make you feel uncomfortable because they want you to touch them. Mommy will never get mad at you for that. And I think just instilling that idea very early on that no one has the right, she has power over her own body, is a very necessary thing for not only girls, for boys as well, because it happens to them too.
Did you feel powerful Was there a point in a line where you'd say, yes, at this age or at this juncture, I felt, for me, when I was in my 40s, I started feeling powerful. I just stopped giving a shit. And that very highly correlates. I know you curse a lot, so I'm not worried about this.
No, don't worry about me.
But I really it was very freeing. Yeah. That to me was highly correlated with having a sense of power when I just did not care how someone else would judge what I was doing, what I was thinking, what I was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think the minute that I started owning who I was as a person, and just letting it all hang out and not being afraid, I took the power away from other people. For so long in my life, I've been in the public eye for 20 years, and I've tried to be really private, and so much of my life was splayed out against my will, and very personal, devastating things as well, that I became very afraid of letting myself out, letting my real person out. And I do a show where my role is very specific, and so you don't get to see a lot of my own personality. But I think for me, again, it was through my writing. My memoir was a watershed moment for me. It took me 5 years to write that thing. And other than having my kid, it was the hardest thing I had to do. But I'm so glad I did it, because I took the power away and back, because there's nothing anyone could say about me that I hadn't said already about myself. And you're right, that didn't happen until I was well in my 40s, and it didn't happen until I stopped giving a shit. I really, I have a good job. Because of what I do, a lot of other people are employed too. I'm a good mom. I pay taxes. That's it. I don't know anybody, anything else. And that's just fine.
What's your advice then to younger women, some of whom are here, about how they, are we telling them, so listen, wait till 45, it'll all work out for you, you'll get your power? Because I'm not sure that's the message.
Well, that's impossible, right? That's half your life gone. So, no.
God, don't put it that
Sorry.
way. What? That's a third of your life gone.
Listen, the back 40 is great, by the way. Don't let them tell you otherwise.
So true.
What
so
you
true.
lose because of gravity, you gain because of wisdom, and it's so worth it. It really is. I think to young women, I would say, really find your power, but be realistic with yourselves about it. My power was clearly in my knowledge and my interest and enthusiasm and curiosity about food, travel, people from all those places, culture. That's what my whole real productive, intellectual, professional life has been about. But, I always wanted to be in theater. I studied theater. I still love the theater. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. But at a certain point, it became evident to me that I should push against the open door. You have to let go of ego. And that's hard to do when you're a young person, because you want to do whatever is the ideal and people fill your heads about everything. But life is long. And most people don't travel in a straight line. And it takes you some time in life to finish cooking, in a way, finish becoming who you're going to be as a person. That doesn't happen when you're 25. At least it didn't for me. It didn't even happen until, I was well in my 30s. And I was freaked out about that. I'm definitely a late bloomer. I was worried that I would never really succeed. And I was, in my 30s, my early 30s, I was acting in film or auditioning a lot. I was writing a syndicated column for the New York Times. I had a style column in Harper's Bazaar. I wrote a cookbook and was doing a food show.
So that all sounds amazing, check.
It sounds amazing, but I needed every single one of those jobs I just listed to make a living. That's my point. Not one of those things was going to net me out a salary that I could live on for a year. And that's a very important thing. I think we have to not be so lofty. We have to understand our short-term goals, our mid-term goals, and our longer-term goals. And sometimes just go with the flow. Don't refuse an opportunity because it's not exactly what you want. And life has a way of guiding us to our our best if we let it. And so I think a lot of young women have one idea in their head because they're told to have that idea in their head. Like, we are supposed to have, our career figured out, probably be engaged, maybe even married by 30, hopefully buying our first house by 32, and having kids definitely before 37. That's not realistic. I mean, just the emails you have to answer alone prevent you from doing all of that today. Sure, if I didn't have a cell phone where everyone called me, yes, I would be able to achieve those goals, but those goals are antiquated. They're from a totally different world and a totally different time. And so are the rules that a lot of people are still playing by in the office, at these different professional situations where you can see there's a real clash of understanding. And I think one way to get power, although it may not seem like it all when you first start doing it, is to clearly telegraph and state what you want and what you don't want. I think that is really important. I've never, been in a situation where I've decided not to be nice and protect someone else's ego. I've just decided to say in the most benevolent way I can, I'm not interested in this, and we're working together, so please don't make me feel uncomfortable. And literally, like, turning on my heels, not screaming, not shouting, just looking them in the eye. And that takes a lot of guts. It's hard to do that with your boss. I get that. I get what I'm saying is not so easy for most young women. But it's necessary, sadly. And we also have to take ownership over our boundaries. And in the end, the people that are worth working with will want the valuable people and will not treat anybody like that, because no one who's valuable is going to work in that environment for that long. And so if you consider yourself valuable, work on your talent, not on accepting things that you don't need to accept to succeed.
I agree with you very much on all of that, but especially the spelling it out, because I think a lot of times things are lost in what's not said. Many years ago, when there was the tsunami in Thailand, and I got a call from the assignment desk. I was working at CNN at the time, and they called me and said, they actually called me to not send me to Thailand. They're like, we know, I just had my twin boys. Okay. So they said, we know you're a mom, and I had 4 kids under 4 by then, and we know that you're not we're just calling to let you know that we need someone to go to Thailand, but we're basically running it by you because we know you're a mommy and you're not gonna, and I was like, girl, I have 4 kids under 4. Thailand, here I come.
I was going to say, it sounds easier. The tsunami sounds better than the tornado at home.
Nobody more than me would love to be on a plane out of the country right now. But it really felt like you had to constantly, even using humor, right, undermine people's expectations about you all the time. To have some of those blunt conversations about, no, actually, here's what I want. No, let me be very clear about how I'm feeling about this. And it sounds like that's how you've navigated it too.
Yeah, I mean, I also had my child later. I was 39 when I had Krishna, and, I was already doing Top Chef for several years. And, Judge's Table, if you've ever watched the show, it takes hours. It literally used to take like 6 hours. I mean, I remember the Puerto Rico finale where Gail actually falls asleep on the table, and the sun is coming up, and my lighting crew is like scrambling to adjust for that. And after I had the baby, I was very clear about what I needed. And to be fair, Bravo had been very kind and shut down the show and waited for me to have the baby. And, they could have not done that. They could have gotten someone else to do it. But, I also work for a company run by women. And so I had Krishna on set with me. I still have her on set with me. Now that she's older, she'll be able to go for less amount of time because she can't miss that much school. But she was there. I would nurse, and we had a clock that just, my costume person said he could tell because he'd watch the screen and you just see my boobs get bigger, like, by the minute.
It's like, everybody break, she's got a nurse.
No, but we had a code. It was 8008. And so they say, it's an 8008, we have to stop down, and then I would go nurse, and I would come back, and lo and behold, everyone thanked me on the crew. You know why? Because all of a sudden, Judge's Table took half the time. So it can be done. You just have to push your colleagues to work with you on it, I think I also, my experience is different in that, they either do it or they don't, and then they don't have their host. But I think if you can plan it so that you try to be in a work environment that is supportive of the rest of your life, it really helps. We can't always do that for all of our career, but that should be an important part of your calculation too, about what kind of job you want and who the companies are that you want to work with.
Do you think about your legacy?
Not yet. No. I mean, I think about my legacy as far as my books. I am often...
How many books have you written?
I've written 4 books. And, I just think about, sometimes I'm stymied by the fact that books last a long time on the shelf. And so, obviously I want my books to sell, but more important than them hitting the New York Times list is them being still good 10 years from now, because I have a lot of books on my shelf and I pick them up and I think, whoa, what was, that was a moment. But you know what I mean? I think that's how I think of my legacy. I think of it in terms of writing. I think about it in the, in the Women's Foundation. I founded the Endometriosis Foundation of America 10 years ago. I think about my legacy there. I think about my legacy whenever I pick up the phone and mentor a young woman, or write a foreword for a young woman's book, or stay on the phone this weekend for an hour with somebody who was having trouble with making a career transition. I think that's the way that I really measure my legacy, in the power that in the way that my accomplishments can trickle down and be used by someone else for more good. I think that's what makes it worth it.
The Endometriosis Foundation, I think, is a good example. I didn't realize that you had suffered for so long, really in silence. And I think it comes back around to real power, I guess, is having a voice, because you get to say to people, you don't actually have to suffer in silence. I've done it. Mm-hmm. It's not cool, not fun. And so I'm telling you, we don't have to just suck it up, whether it's endometriosis or it's sexual harassment, right, or it's sexual assault or it's rape, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess as I look at all this artwork around us, and many of these are sort of people's personal stories that get a platform, mm-hmm, you don't have to just not share or not tell.
Well, I think we are all ashamed of the things that sometimes hold us back because we internalize them. We somehow think I must have done something to invite X, Y, and Z advance, or, what's wrong with me that I can't deal with my period, which is one of the basic things of womanhood. Or, I don't want anyone to know I was assaulted because it's so gross and I don't want to talk about it and all that stuff. I think the more we talk and the more we understand that our voices do matter, the better off we'll all be. I was told very early, because of what happened to me at 7, that, I was shown every sign that my voice didn't matter. I also come from Asian culture, in Indian culture, women are taught to be very reserved, very docile, very accommodating, not making waves, making everyone like you, learning how to cook, all that stuff. And of course, we have a huge female workforce now, but it's not a culture in general that rewards speaking out about anything, And so I think I internalized that very deeply. And so when certain things happened to me, I didn't feel like I could speak out. I had too much to do. I think I made also the calculation that I could talk about this and let this rule my life and bring more trauma on for another year or 2, or I could just try to get into college and get out of Dodge, which is what I chose to do, because there was no mechanism for reporting and being supported and having counseling and being protected. And I think that really needs to happen. I think we need to support each other. I think women in their 40s need to take it upon themselves to find young women, to help them, to counsel them, to tell them what happened to them. I mean, that's what I try to do with my daughter. When I tell her that, she's, every September, she's always like, I know, Mommy, I know. And I said, well, I'm sorry I'm telling you, but it happened to Mommy, and it really affected my life. It always made me insecure. And I carried that around and didn't know how to deal with it because I hadn't dealt with what happened to me. And I don't want that to happen to any woman. It's what I don't want to, I don't want any woman to have to suffer with endometriosis in silence, because there is treatment. And that's what made me so mad. The only way I could find to turn all that power for 23 years, 12 months, a week each month, to turn all that power into pain was by doing something productive with it, was by opening my mouth and saying, listen, 200 million women have this disease, and there is surgery for it, but most insurance companies don't cover it. And you can use birth control to control the symptoms, but a lot of people want to take that away from us too. So it just requires us to be really open. Just, not have any preconceived notions, but just be open and listen to each other's stories and tell other people our stories.
I want to open it up for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. There's one right in the front row. The only demands I have as moderator is your question must have a question, or I shall stop you. You want to stand up?
Hi, I'm 21 years old and on leave from Harvard for book tour and reproductive rights activism. And I actually wrote the letter that you signed for the Washington Post asking the Department of Education for free period products. But one of the things that I was sort of reflecting on in looking through this exhibition was like my own diary, and realizing how much my own diary is just riddled with like complaining about imposter syndrome. And I was wondering, as a woman of influence and power and being a public figure, if you struggle with imposter syndrome and like the feeling of inadequacy with all of your accomplishments, and how you tackle that and get over it, and what you would tell like young women dealing with the same thing.
I totally have struggled with imposter syndrome, but like until 3 years ago. And I've been doing my show for 16 seasons. Not just 3 years ago, but for a long time. Even after all those Emmy nominations and all that stuff, yes, because I was different, because I wasn't, on Top Chef, I wasn't a chef. I had never commanded a kitchen army of staff. I had never owned a restaurant. I hadn't gone to culinary school. I was coming at it from a food writer's point of view, which is fine. But if you notice, like, everyone else is a completely different animal than I am. And I did have imposter syndrome. And I think as women, we have that anyway. We always feel like we have to prove something to be better than our male counterparts. And I go through that all the time. Every time I write a cookbook or publish an article, I wonder, like, what the hell business do I have publishing an op-ed? And I'm not talking about the New York Times op-ed. I'm talking about all this other stuff. And it took me a really long time to get over imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome, like any other anxiety, is only remedied by taking that energy that is zapped by those thoughts or feelings and trying to divert them, trying to pivot them into some actionable activity. Like, what I mean by that is some actionable, tangible thing that you can do. Like, instead of, feeling like an imposter syndrome, lean into why you're feeling that way. I'm going to use myself as an example. So, I was feeling like, okay, why did I feel that? Because I'd never worked in a restaurant. So I, went to visit Eric Ripert, who's a big chef, and I just watched his kitchen and how it operated. I got one of his sous chefs years ago to teach me how to do different knife cuts, because I'm a home cook. Then I, along with someone else in my office, I took a knife skills class at the Culinary Institute. And so those were things that obviously wouldn't get me, on par with Danielle Boulud, but it would at least do something to mitigate the feeling of helplessness, and that I didn't know enough, have enough, wasn't enough. At least I was trying to combat that with something that was beneficial and additive to me. And so you have to find that. When you're feeling like you don't know enough, go pick up a book. Go read Susan Sontag. When you're thinking, I don't know enough history, go read about Seneca Falls, whatever that means. And it's so easy now with the internet. When I was a kid, we had to go to the library.
Back in the day, before Google. Great question. Where's our next question?
Hi, I work at IOM, the UN Migration Agency, and I had a question. I know that you're a migrant, and I just wanted to ask you if you can touch a little bit on your migration story. It is so inspiring, and I would love to hear about it. And at IOM, we think that migration is very positive. There are a lot of benefits of migration, and as you know now, the toxic is very negative. And I wanted also to ask you if you see a relationship between cooking and migration, and how
Definitely.
like cuisines, different cuisines around the world are enriched because of people's movement and migration.
Great question.
Definitely. Okay, let me take those questions one at a time. My immigrant story is very simple. My mother had a very turbulent arranged marriage in India, and she chose to leave my father with the support of her family. So we left my father's house when I was a year old. When I was 2 years old, my mother left my grandparents' house and came to America. I joined her here in New York 2 years later. When she came here, she literally had nothing, but she did have an education. She was a nurse. And at that time in the 70s, there was a large deficit of well-trained medical professionals. So they offered a lot of lucrative, visas for her. And so our story is a little different than somebody, who's a refugee or an asylum seeker. But it wasn't that different once we got here, because she had nothing. Literally, like, she had $100. And in 1972, that was a lot, but it still wasn't that much. And we had to make a life here in New York, and then later on the West Coast. She was a single mom. She had to take me everywhere because she often couldn't afford a babysitter, things like that. And so the immigration issue is obviously one that's very personal to me and very, very important. Not only because I'm an immigrant, but because I know how beneficial it is to have a diverse population in your culture. And I grew up in New York City, and I never felt, I felt different, but everybody was different. And I think the commingling of all those different cultures bumping up against each other is fantastic. I think it's what makes cultures interesting. And at no time, in history, have we had more migration around the world than we do today. And I see that as something hugely positive. I mean, without migration, we would have never had the city of Granada. We would have never, we've never had pomegranates, which came from North Africa. We would never have Columbus. We would never have all these wonderful things. To me, the most interesting things come out of that cross-pollination. And it's how I choose to live my life, but it's also something that I think directly affects my work in food. You can tell, I was talking about Spain a minute ago, you can tell through Spanish food that it's had so much other influence on it, from the cumin, from the pomegranate, from all of the North African stuff. And then you can also see the Jewish influence before they were expelled. And so to me, that intersection of food, culture, and history is really wonderful, because you can trace a country or civilization's food through everyone that's been through there. And I think it at the very least brings about more delicious food. Everything that we think of as American, the hot dog, that's not American, it's German. It came here 100 years ago to the World's Fair. American is apple pie. There's nothing American about apple pie. There really isn't. Not one ingredient in apple pie, including the apples, is from North America. Not the refined sugar that's from down south, not the flour that's milled, not the lard that was rendered. Native Americans didn't do that. Not the cinnamon, which was from the other India, not the nutmeg, none of it. And yet that has become so American. So what is American varies greatly depending on who you ask and when you ask the question. And I think the greatest thing about this country is the fact that it is welcoming, traditionally, to all immigrants, because that is what makes our culture so rich. We're able to distill the best of what we can extract from each culture and make our own uniquely American culture. And if you look at what America is today, you're really looking at a country built by immigrants, whether it's Norwegian immigrants and their descendants from 200 years ago, Italian immigrants, Nigerian immigrants, Vietnamese immigrants, like everybody has something to contribute to this culture that is superior because of its immigrant population, not because of its military, and not because of its rampant capitalism. I just want to be clear, like that is why they give visas to people all over the world, so that they can come and contribute to this culture.
Great question. I think we have time for one more, maybe two more questions, so let's take one.
Hi. I'm an editor with CBS Interactive. Actually, my question is for the interviewer, if you don't mind, but speaking about immigration and family, and I was appalled, and I told Soledad earlier, you were talking about your mom today a lot on Twitter, and it was really moving. What would you say is the one thing that you took from your mom that inspired you and make the woman that you are today?
So my mom died this morning. She was 89, and she'd been sick for a long time. One thing that I feel sorry for young women, my mother had such great advice for young working women. She would not let you feel sorry for yourself. I remember when I had my fourth child, she's like, oh, 4 kids, huh? I had 6 without any help. 4 is really not that many. So
I think after 3 it's all
exactly, it's just chaos, basically. And so I think for me, what I took from her was this idea that you have a lot of power. You just have to kind of go and get it and recognize that sure you'll be worried, sure you're not sure you're right. You will screw up every which way. Her advice to me was always sit in bed for 24 hours and eat ice cream, and then get up at the 24th hour, you get out of bed and you make a list and you start moving forward. And I literally would do that, like, I can't believe we broke up. And then be like, but here's my list. And you start working on it. And I think that that's great advice. It was great advice for me as a young woman of like, let's just move forward. And I really am sorry for people losing her, because she adopted a lot of my friends to give them advice. That, and then she'd throw in a lot of Jesus. She was all about Jesus. Find Jesus in your life. That's also good.
I think young people don't know, young women especially, don't know that they have power.
Right.
I didn't understand the power that I had. It took me a long time, too long, to find that. And I hope that we do a better job of telling young people that they do have power, whether it's to speak out, whether it's to right a wrong, whether it's not to put up with something. They actually have internalized that they just have to put up with, that it's part of the road to success, that you just have to step around the ogres, or just tiptoe around them, and then just grin and bear it until it's done. Try not grinning. People get the message real fast.
Or asking. I mean, I've always been surprised now that I run a small company, that people are sort of like trying to send me signals mentally, as opposed to just say you need the week off, or say I'd like to make more money, or say I really would like to be a producer on this shoot. You're like, okay, I can't read your mind. I'm fine with that. Let's go do it. And so some of that power, I think, is that go grab it. Just go say it and go grab it and figure it out.
But also, I think there's that notion of no one's going to give it to you is also a very important thing to understand. Like, yes, you have to ask for it, but I think you also have to demonstrate, why you deserve that power. Like, I think actions and consistency go a long way. It's easy for us to also say, I'm not talking about the example specifically that you mentioned, but just to say what we want, but actually to prove it through living the life of a person who expects and deserves and wants that. I think we think like, oh, I'll wait for so-and-so. I'll wait till I get that better job to really spread my wings. Well, no, spread your wings now. You don't know what this job could turn into,
Exactly. I think we are at time. We're on time. So I want to, of course, thank Padma. Fantastic. Thank you. And to our questions in the audience, thank you as well.